We're going to go through STAR story, best practices, and common mistakes. This is really going to help you to be as competitive as possible against other candidates. So let's dive in. So, first up, and most people get this feedback pretty quickly, don't say we. When you say we, you're not telling the panel what you did. You become a passenger. You were there when this happened, but your role is not clear. Put yourself in the driving seat. Instead of we got approval, say instead, I secured written approval from the senior manager through an email. You should eliminate nearly every single we statement in your whole story. This is not a natural way of talking, but it is essential that the panel understands what you did, not just what happened. Your goal is to deliver strong action verb statements that showcase your capabilities. So, I built, I created, I led a discussion, I investigated the report, I conducted an interview, I completed a review. Strong I action statements. Interviews are really tough situations, and when you've practiced an answer really hard, it's often difficult to let go when what you prepared doesn't fit. You will 100% have to make up answers on the fly. By going through this course, practicing and doing multiple real interviews, you're building up your ability to answer questions on the fly. As a public servant, this is a skill you need for the rest of your career. If your pre-prepared answers don't fit, ditch them and do the best you can. Central to this is understanding and writing down or having a copy of the question and unpacking it. Which leads me to the next point, which is rambling and talking to fill in gaps. When we get nervous, one of the things that we default back to is filling in silence with talking. Stop, pause. Even if you know what you're going to say when a question is asked, pause, breathe, and gather your thoughts. If you feel yourself rambling, pause, look back at the question, and if you have to stop and get things back on track with a pause, that is the right thing to do. That is what the panel wants you to do as well. Pause, breathe, look at the question, and get back on track. Okay, so this one is just practice. You need to time your answers, and it may be really helpful to have a cheap timer in front of you during the interview. Yes, you can use your phone, but lots of things can go wrong there. Pick up a cheap timer for $5 and use that in your practice and even in video interviews. You can recover from talking too long in one answer by making other answers shorter. But if this is a risk for you, work on your timing and find a way to keep time during practice and live interview events. Detail is hard to get right. It's something that takes a bit of practice, and this is where doing practice sessions with a friend, a colleague, or a family member is really valuable. Your story should not be loaded with jargon and technical terms to the point where it couldn't be understood by someone who doesn't work in your area. There's a great saying here, allegedly from Einstein, which is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. You'll notice this of successful leaders when they talk. They explain things in simple ways that gives you an easy understanding of the point they're making. There are two key things with detail. You should provide detail to support the storytelling. And you need to provide details for the evidence of what you did and why that was successful. So, just as a super quick example, instead of saying, I led a project, you would say, I led a 3-month project with a team of 4 people. Instead of saying, we delivered the briefing really quickly, you would say, I delivered the briefing note within 2 business days, with the first draft being sent for review to the branch manager on the same day the request landed in my inbox. Another really common challenge that people have is finishing strongly. First of all, it often helps to signpost the outcome or result part. And the result was, or, so the outcome of this was, and this goes back to storytelling, a clear finish to your example. You really should have facts that you can use to conclude your story, which provide evidence that what you did worked. Now, in a perfect world, you'd say something like, due to my actions, I measured an 18% decrease in complaints after 1 month. But of course, that sort of statement doesn't work for many types of stories, and you very often don't have data like that. 2 suggestions that will help you here are, firstly, circle back to the wording of the question. So, in conclusion, I believe this is a great example of my problem-solving skills. It's a great technique to repeat the wording back of the question when you wrap up. You're telling the panel, I just answered your question. The second tip to help you wrap up is to talk about feedback you received. When you talk about feedback, mention specifically who gave you that feedback, what they said, and how they said it. So, for example, instead of saying the stakeholders were really happy with the report, what is much better is to say something like, the head of operations sent an email to my manager congratulating me on the quality of the new report and mentioned how effective my communications were throughout the process. What you're doing is shifting from an opinion, the stakeholders were happy, to a fact. An email was sent by this person, and this is what it said. This is an excellent way to finish many types of stories because it positions evidence by providing detail. Okay, the last common issue is not having the right level of answer. And look, this is not necessarily a mistake. You might absolutely nail the interview and give great answers, but often people get feedback that your answers were great, but not right for this level. Or to put it another way, your answers weren't strategic enough, or you didn't show enough leadership experience. These are common areas of feedback. It can take a little bit of creativity and careful thought to position transferable skills if you lack experience in areas like leading teams. It's not always a technique question. Often the solution here is to maybe work with a coach to bridge that gap or look for more professional development opportunities that specifically give you experiences to talk about in interviews. You don't always have to choose a story from a time when you were acting at level. We always search for the most relevant example first, and then if we can, choose a recent example. So those are some of the common mistakes that I see, and probably the other major area that we always need to work on is the length of an example. Finding that right balance of hitting the mark with your story, but not talking for too long. Story length will vary based on the role complexity and the question. Don't pad out answers, whatever you do. If you can nail the question in 30 seconds or 60 seconds, do it. And remember that you've got all sorts of questions to cover. And especially in very technical roles, you may get some questions that are even just a yes, no type of answer. But we're talking about star stories. And I would say that stories should fall into the 2 to 4 minute range. It's possible to handle very simple questions with short examples under 2 minutes, but most questions require detail that takes 2 to 4 minutes to really land your answer. Answers over 4 minutes are risky as you need to manage the allocated time that you have in the interview. Certainly, if you are practicing stories, I would recommend setting a maximum of around 3.5 to 4 minutes in your rehearsals. You're likely to have to change some of the story on the day to fit the precise question. And with some nerves and some pauses, you might get close to 5 minutes, which is absolutely the upper limit of how long you can talk before you run into serious risks of running over time. Okay, so I hope that gives you some insights into common mistakes and some areas for you to focus on in your story practice. I actually recommend coming back to this lesson when you've got into that deep practice around your story development and you're taking a critical look at how to improve. But anyway, I hope that for now this has been useful. Take a moment to review the key takeouts from the lesson.